And for our first session, I'm delighted to be joined by Adrian Leeds, founder of the Adrian Leeds Group. We'll be discussing buying real estate and getting a mortgage as a US expat. Adrian has decades of experience helping Americans invest and buy real estate in France. She speaks at conferences and seminars all over the world on a variety of related topics to living and investing in France. Our website, adrianleeds.com, provides a wealth of information for Francophiles as well as complete services to find properties in France. Thank you very much for joining us, Adrian. How are you today?
Thank you, Hugo, but you make me sound very old, decades of experience.
I think I got that from your website. I apologize.
No, what can I say? I really do appreciate being here, and I would like to, make it really clear from the outset that my domain is France, okay? I don't know anything about all of the other countries in Europe. I don't know anything about real estate in the United States or Canada because I have been centered in France for all these years and focused on Francophiles, that mostly North American Francophiles as well as Australians and New Zealanders, but Anglophones in general, and some out of Britain, but not that many.
Sure.
But at any rate, yeah. I do have a presentation that I'd like to make. I hope that's okay with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so before you start, okay. I was just going to say that please bear in mind to our audience that the information presented is for educational purposes only, and you should always seek your own personalized financial advice. Adrian will be answering your questions at the end, so please ask them in the Q&A pop-up at the foot of your screen as and when you think of them, and we'll answer them at the end, as many as we can, time permitting. So without further ado, over to you, Adrian.
Well, thank you. And let me just add that you can see Patty Sadowskis on camera. She is my executive assistant, and she works with me on all of these webinars because as the questions come in, she can monitor them in the chat and maybe even answer some of them along the way so that we can get more of the questions answered. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation. Let me make sure that I've got a screen share on. Here we go. And okay, does that look good, Hugo? You see it? It's fine?
Looking good, yeah, all working.
Okay, great. So what we're going to talk about today are the challenges of buying property, and as I said, primarily in France. Maybe a lot of this will actually bleed over into the rest of Europe. Some of it will, I know for sure, but these are the challenges that we certainly face here. Now, first of all, let me just explain who we are. We are property consultants. I like to think of us as French Property the American way. We are a licensed real estate agency in France, but we work more for the buyer than the seller because we provide property consultation. We do property search for both rentals as well as purchases. We do offer some sales and listings, but we can also assist in making a purchase or making a sale for someone who's not sur place, who is not on the ground. And we do appraisals, we offer financing resources, and we have colleagues who do renovation and decoration as well. So we're pretty much soup to nuts and full service. The reason we exist is because there's no MLS in France. Now, an MLS is the multiple listing service. It's a service in the United States that means that every property that goes on the market at the same time, at the same moment, everywhere in the United States by virtue of the multiple listing service. And that makes a huge difference because it means that every agent has access to every property at that same moment. So therefore, the agents basically work more for the buyer than for the seller, which is the absolute opposite in France. Now, of course, there's a different process here. The laws are different. You're dealing in a different language. You're dealing in a different currency. Culturally, everything's different. And everything you do is different than if you're in the US or Canada. So having someone protecting you on the ground in France, we believe is very, very important. And that's gives us a job. That's why we're here. So, of course, there's an awful lot of France to love. I don't know how much of this audience is interested in France as compared to other parts of Europe, but of course, we are completely in love and enamored with France. Paris is, of course, rivals London as one of the most visited cities in the world. It offers a very urban lifestyle. It does have a high cost of living. Paris real estate is very expensive. And it's actually twice as expensive as almost anywhere else in France and more. So, for example, the Riviera, Nice and the Riviera offers both an urban and a suburban and even a rural lifestyle, but it's quite a bit less expensive. It's about half as expensive as Paris to live on the Riviera, which isn't bad. I spend about half of my year in Nice on the Riviera, and I can tell you that having the two cities is just a perfect, absolutely perfect situation going back and forth. Then there's Provence, which we find a tremendous number of Americans and North Americans love Provence more than other rural areas of the country. And it is a more moderate cost of living. So that offers some real opportunity. But then, of course, there's, a lot of other regions and provinces where you can find both urban and suburban and rural lifestyles, which with a much lower cost of living. So there's a lot of France to love. And very recently, we did a webinar with the Alliance Française, as a matter of fact, all about how to decide where to live in France, because it's a big conundrum for a lot of people. It's sort of like you just want to close your eyes and stick your finger out on the map and figure out where you're going to land, and all of it's great. Now, I have a particular list of things that I believe are important for expats, a checklist of things that a location should satisfy. And I personally believe that it's really important to have an American community, which makes it very easy to make friends. It makes it easier to transition with language, and it's a way of commiserating with your fellow Americans on all the difficulties you will have on making this transition. So I believe it's really important to have a good community. Maybe even more important than that is really good access to transportation. So there are 4 international airports in France. 2 are in Paris, Charles de Gaulle and Orly, and then Nice is an international airport and Marseille is an international airport. And aside from that, having a good TGV hub, which is the train à grande vitesse, the high-speed train, can really get you going places. We work with a lot of retirees who tell me that they want to travel. And if they want to travel, then they really need to be close to the airports. So we believe that that's very important. Now, the question of whether you really want to have a car or not has to do also with whether you're willing to get a French driving license or not. Can you all tell me if you see a light flashing on my screen or not? Because I'm seeing that there's a light flashing.
It looks like, it does look like there's a light flashing.
There's a light flashing. I have no idea where that's coming from. So I've got Star Wars going on here, and I have absolutely no idea. Okay, so just so you know, this this makes it interesting, if nothing else, because there's nothing in here that's flashing. I'm going to keep going on that case. Anyway. Having a car or not at your disposal, there is an opportunity to change the way you're living. If you're an American always driving everywhere you go and living in that, what I call that bubble, then this is your opportunity to live in a more urban environment where you don't need to have a car at all. And you wouldn't need to get a French driving license, which is difficult and expensive to achieve and must be obtained within the first year of your having a visa. So this is a big conversation, but it really determines where you think you might want to live as to whether you want to have a car or not. And then, of course, there's the cost of living, which is mainly housing is what's more expensive than in other places. That will determine where. And whether you've got good access to healthcare and hospitals. If you're older, maybe you want to make sure that you are in close proximity to an emergency room or a hospital. I think this could be very important. Other people prefer to just be in a place where they've got good business opportunities or lots of cultural activities. That's another consideration. And for those who are not fluent in French, language might be an issue. So do you want to be somewhere where language is easy? In other words, speaking English is, not speaking French is not a problem. In areas where more English is spoken, that could be a necessity. So the bottom line is, do you want to be urban? Do you want to be suburban? Do you want to be rural? Do you want to be in an apartment or a house in the countryside? These are all things to consider when you're thinking about where you're going to be living. And that could be the same thing for whether it's France or any other country in Europe, quite honestly. Now, as far as finding property, in France, anyone can purchase property. You do not need any special visa. And again, there's no multiple listing service. So that means that every agent or every agency only has access to their own listings and not the other agency's listings. So you have to go from agency to agency. Now, in most of France, they really do not expect to split their commission with another agency. There's usually about 5% included in the asking price. We find that we have a commission split often in the South, but never in Paris. The agencies here just won't do it. They won't share their information. They're very proprietary. And as I said, the commission sharing does differ between regions and attitudes. And you have to remember that when the agent represents the seller, not the buyer, that they will do or say almost anything to make a sale. So it's very important that you are protected by someone who is looking out for your own interests and you're not believing everything the sales agent is saying. Now, our primary service is property finding anywhere in France. I'm sure you're going to be talking about FATCA during these sessions. FATCA is extremely important to Americans who are living outside of the United States. It's the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. It was passed in 2010 as part of the HIRE Act. And basically, it places regulations on foreign financial institutions to report their U.S. customers. Now, because of it, we have certain compliance and issues that we have to meet. First of all, there is a form, it's called the FBAR reporting, and anyone who holds $10,000 or more in a foreign currency in a foreign bank account must report that annually to the IRS. It's not taxed, but it is reported. And this is very important. So it's at any one time if there was more than $10,000 in that account. It's really not a big deal. I don't think anybody should get worried about that. But what's happened as far as FATCA is concerned for expats all over the world is that it has created banking and borrowing issues because the banks no longer want us as clients. We are pariahs on the banking industry worldwide. And this really has presented problems for the average, North American, not North American, because this doesn't happen in Canada. But it really does present problems for us. And there are huge penalties if you are not complying. So you want to be sure that you are reporting to the FBAR. Now, as far as getting a bank account, there are now many banks that will not actually even give you a bank account as an American if you hold an American passport. Even if you hold a French passport and an American passport, you're still required based on FATCA regulations to be reported as an American, and therefore the bank could deny you access. Fortunately, we have relationships with a few banks that will open accounts for Americans, and we have been able to do this, but you cannot do it from long distance. You have to be on the ground in their offices, make an appointment one-on-one, and fill out an awful lot of forms, and then you can get an account. So it's not impossible, but it is difficult. This has also led to borrowing issues. So what's happened as far as finding financing, and we work with a number of different brokers who do specialize in the North American buyer. But again, there's a very limited number of banks willing to lend to Americans. Now, financing is possible if you are about 60 years old and younger. It's not impossible if you're over 60 years old, but it only under certain circumstances. And that is because there is a mandatory life insurance policy that is in place, to secure the loan in the event of death. And because the premiums become expensive over the age of 60, they really want that loan to end by the time you're 75. So that's one reason that they won't look at older borrowers. Now, the mortgage payment must not exceed more than 1/3 of your disposable income. And they prefer to lend to salaried individuals rather than self-employed. It's all about risk. The banks don't want to take many risks. And so this makes it even more difficult, but not impossible. And interest rates that were as low as 1% just a few months ago are climbing, and now are at about 3%, and are predicted to increase even further. So, we had a very wonderful window of opportunity a few months ago when the euro to the dollar was at parity, and when interest rates were under 2%, we had this amazing opportunity, but things have definitely changed. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that at that time, the banks were not making much money at all because, if you're only charging 1% to 2% interest, they really didn't want to they didn't want to make small loans. They were not interested in, actually doing much of anything. But thank goodness now that rates are rising, the banks are more interested in giving out loans. So it is an advantage on one hand and a disadvantage on another hand. Now, we do work with a number of different brokers who can talk to banks that do lend to Americans. We highly recommend also working with currency brokers to transfer the money from one currency to another better than the commercial banks, because the brokers charge about 1% in the spread, which is the difference between the buy and the sell rate, when the banks usually charge about 3%. So why make the banks your money? It's just not, it's just not necessary. For example, the current rate of exchange is about $1.08 to the euro, which is quite favorable. 1 year ago, the rate of exchange was $1.15 to the euro. So if you purchased a property worth 500,000 euros, it would have cost you $575,000. Today, that same property would cost you $540,000. So that's a savings of $35,000. If you work with a currency broker, and one of the brokers we recommend highly is Money Corp, we've been working with them for many years, you can also work with them to do what's called a buy forward, so that you lock in a rate now. They will hold that rate for up to 2 years. You give them only 10% of the amount that you're transferring until it has to actually move over. And therefore, you can control the rate of exchange a little bit better. So what it does is it takes the risk out of the rate of exchange. I highly recommend working with a broker and not your commercial bank when you make this exchange of currency. When you're dealing in these kinds of prices, amounts, every penny counts. Now, for those who think they're going to buy a property and then rent it short-term, mid-term, or long-term to generate revenue, you just need to know that in France, there are very strict rental laws that apply to cities of 200,000 population or more. Now that applies to Paris, for example, and to Nice, which is highly rentable. If it is a primary residence, you can legally rent it up to 120 days a year on short term, meaning less than 1 month. If it is a secondary residence, then your only real legal opportunity is a long-term lease, which is 1 year, or a mobility lease, which is 1 to 10 months to someone who's there on business or education. Now in Nice, they will allow a short-term rental for up to 6 years of your ownership. However, your building has to agree with the short-term rentals, and the city has to approve you as well. So it's a little bit tricky, and you need to be careful that you don't buy into a property without knowing what the regulations, the bylaws of the building say specifically. And if you do this illegal, you are subject to possible infraction fines of up to 50,000 euros. So it's not cheap, and you want to be careful. The purchase process in France takes time. It's complicated. It's in its usual French bureaucratic manner. But what's good about that is it's really low risk because they dot their I's and cross their T's. It takes about 4 to 6 months to go from the initial visit to a final signing of a deed. That gives you the time along the way to organize your mortgage and all the important documentation. It is handled by a notaire who is a special lawyer who handles this kinds of transaction. Now, what happens is the sellers tend to allow only about 5% room for negotiation. They really do not haggle. There are no bidding wars like there are in the United States because the seller is morally obligated to accept asking price, so they don't play that kind of a bidding war game. There is a pre-sale agreement that is signed early on, which outlines everything. This is when you have to do all of your due diligence. It's when we work with you to know everything there is to know about the property. It's called either a promesse or a compromis de vente. And when that is signed, you put down 10% deposit that's held in escrow, and you still have 10 days following that within which you can fully retract your purchase. So it's a cooling off period that gives you some consumer protection. Once that happens, however, you are obligated to make this purchase. And then there's another 2 to 4 months between the signing of the pre-sale agreement and the final deed to allow for the financing process. So you really need to allow a 4 to 6 month process from the time that you visit the property to final closing. Now here's just an outline of the cost of property all over France. These are per square meter prices. It's basically outlined that way based on size. And you can see that Paris is the most expensive, and then half of Paris are cities like Lyon and Nice and Bordeaux and Strasbourg as it goes down in order. These are some of the cities that, we see the most interest in, that we believe, fit the parameters, check all the boxes. These are the cities that we like the most. And interestingly enough, Lille for me is a real sleeper because not that many people pay much attention to Lille, but Lille is interesting because not only is it very inexpensive, but because it has easy, fast TGV access to Paris, London, Brussels, and Amsterdam, which makes it very easy to travel outside of the country on an international basis without being in the immediate proximity of an international airport. So we just find that it's a very interesting choice, an opportunity. Now, we make a difference because we represent your interests only. We work for the buyer, not for the seller. We can search for property on behalf of the client for either to rent or to buy. We go out there, ferret all the possibilities out. We talk to all the agencies, even the for sale by owner properties, and do the legwork that would be very difficult for you to do on your own. Meanwhile, we are providing the resources and all the professionals so that we can answer all of your questions. We do all the due diligence. We advise along the way. You have no need for expensive translations because we're going to explain all the documentation to you. We manage the process from beginning to end so that all you have to do is lay back and wait and hear from us when we need something from you. And basically, we think of it as a kind of insurance because we are not going to let a client make a bad decision if we can help it. On top of that, we offer 3 newsletters a week. I write 3 publications every single week that are free. You can unsubscribe at any time. You can subscribe very easily just by visiting our website, adrianleeds.com. If you haven't already seen us on House Hunters International, we've done more than 50 episodes, and they rerun the episodes quite often. This is on the HGTV, House and Garden TV, out of the United States. I also host a monthly coffee gathering called Après-Midi. It's here in Paris. It's on the 2nd Tuesday of every month. We always have a speaker. It's always fun. It's interesting. It's a great way of meeting people. And if you're in Paris on the 2nd Tuesday of the month, please come and visit us. I'm sure you're going to have a great time and meet an awful lot of people. And then we do a number of different webinars. We do quarterly financial forums. We have one coming up on March 8th at 7 p.m. France time with Brian Dunhill from Dunhill Financial. And we do these every quarter. And it's a great way of kind of catching up on what's going on financially in the world. I also book consultations, either individually or group consultations. And these one-on-ones really are the beginning of everything. I can answer all of your questions. And if you want to learn more, just participate in webinars such as this one. This is a fabulous opportunity for everyone. And you can see on our website, whenever we have something coming up, we post it. Just on that note, we have literally helped thousands of people make this move over those decades. And it starts with a consultation in order to strategize how to make this successful for you. I personally believe in getting really good advice, paying professionals to put you on the right path. Whether it's me or someone else, it's just important that you talk to people who know what they're talking about. And I believe that you really need to put fear aside and don't let it get in the way of your dreams, because there is nothing to fear but fear itself. And then I want you to take the word expectation out of your vocabulary, replace it with the word hopes, and therefore in this move, you will never be disappointed. This character in the slide is a guy named John Garland Jones. He came to me and said he was dreaming of singing. He had never done that in his life other than in his shower. He came to Nice. He's now singing professionally, and he's been there for years and loving it. So I think now we can go to a Q&A if people are ready for that. It looks like we've got about 30 minutes.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. That was great. And I think I was struck how much, well, I love hearing about France and the places. And there was a lot that was relevant for expats in other countries too. I think, from FATCA, finding finance, lots for that. Before I would just, a very general question somebody sent in, which I can answer, which is, will these slides be available afterwards? And I think if you do want a copy of the slides, get in touch with Adrian at adrianleeds.com, and I'm sure she'll be happy to send them to you. Okay, Patty, would you like to?
The slides are there.
Sorry?
The slides are on the recording.
Yeah.
The slides are on the recording. That's true. So there's a recording of the session, and I'll put it on YouTube, but it'll be probably I would have thought a few days time, so not immediately.
And I will make it available also to my readers.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to say I'm actually signed up at adrianleeds.com. There's interesting information every week, and it's well worth signing up to the newsletter. Patty, would you like to put some of these questions to Adrian?
Sure. We have a question from Mark Gowdy about mortgages. What are the special circumstances that might allow someone over 60 to get a mortgage? We are retired. Will they consider steady pension income from a U.S. source?
It's called money. The banks like to lend money to people who already have money. I am sorry to say that's how it works. So there are private banks who are very happy to lend money to people who are willing to invest in their own banks. That's one of the ways out, for example. And it's really a sad state of affairs, but banks are basically about risk. So they have to assess whether whether you are low risk or not. But it's not a hardcore 60 years old. So it depends on your financial situation. But they are more interested in income than they are in collateral. They really don't care about your collateral because they can't do much with it.
Let me see. Okay. A question from Olga. Could you please tell us a little about inheritance taxes for properties in France? What is the inheritance tax percentage for children?
Well, that is one of those complicated answers. And inheritance taxes are exorbitantly expensive. Just know that. And I mean, I am in huge disagreement over these French policies, but I don't make the policy, so there's nothing I can do about it. The closer you are as a relative, the less percentage tax you pay. So children pay the least amount, whereas, a niece and nephew and aunt and uncle will pay, or a friend will pay much higher amounts. There are a certain amount that is gifted, okay, or allowed you, and then after that, the tax is based on that. It's very complicated. But with advanced planning, you can set your purchase up in a way that either removes or reduces the inheritance tax to its best advantage. So the real trick is advanced planning and setting up the structure in a way that will make it easier. So for example, you can actually buy a property partially in the name of your children, so that the part that they own, they will never pay any tax on. So that's just an example. I am personally in the process of transferring the title of my own property, which is only in my name, not in my daughter's name. As a gift, I'm gifting it to my daughter so that she will have no inheritance taxes to pay. And it is going to cost me some tax to do that, but it'll cost me a lot less tax to do that now than it would if she were to inherit the property years down the road. So the point to all of that is just advanced planning.
I think I can add something to that I think there, of course, you have to consider both French and US taxes for all these questions. Gift taxes, for example, there may be a US implication for that. We've got some US tax experts talking in a couple of days' time, so that would also be something to put to them, but always seek advice.
In the US, you can inherit $11.5 million, okay, tax-free, not in France. So it's really, our problem is more on the French side than on the US side. That is for sure.
Okay, Adrian, we have a personal question for you from Michael Seeloff. Adrian, what prompted you to move a significant part of your life to Nice after all those decades in Paris?
It's a good question. I first went to Nice and bought an apartment in 2011 with the idea that it would be a good opportunity to develop business down there, as well as a potential retirement spot. And the more time I spent in Nice, the more I wanted to be in Nice. And the more time I do spend in Nice, the more I love Nice. And I will never give up Paris. There's no question. Paris is Paris. But Nice is the perfect antidote to Paris. It is like at the moment, it's at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. It's sunny and blue and gorgeous and colorful. And Patty's in Nice at the moment, loving it. So it's just the perfect balance to have them both. I have been talking with an awful lot of clients about actually doing both, because I know that you could own a property in Nice that costs you half as much as the one in Paris, that you rent out and generate a revenue from, and you take the revenue from what you've generated in Nice and rent an apartment in Paris, which is cheap because there's rent control, so that you can actually have both. So I've got this scheme. I don't have anyone who's taken me up on it though, but.
Well, that made me think that we do have clients who own property in Nice and then own fractional shares in Paris.
Yes, this is true. We
And
do. We have a number of clients. We have some clients who own a fractional property, which we haven't talked about at all, but could, that actually own a share in both cities. And you're right, we have clients that will own a property in one and then a fractional share in the other, so that they can enjoy both cities.
Right. And I'm just thinking too that we have 2 recent clients who will be renting long term in one city and keeping a fractional share in another city. Right. So that they can enjoy both environments.
Exactly.
Okay, we have some more tax related questions, which we'll see how we can do on those. What are the U.S. tax implications of having my non-U.S. citizen parent gift to me an apartment in Europe, which would be paid for with money sourced entirely outside the U.S.?
That is a question. There's no way I can answer that.
Yeah.
I think you need to pose that question to a tax attorney who knows both sides.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you have those experts on this, on the webinar. Yeah. We work with certain expats who are on our website under financing. There's a list of people, but no, that's a complicated question. I would have to ask.
I'm not sure it's something anyone will be able to answer in these sessions either. It's so sort of specific and personal.
Very specific.
Yeah. I think
that's when you want to consult a professional.
Right. Another inheritance related question is, does that 11.5 million in U.S. inheritance amount also include property outside the USA?
Well, what happens is in France, you pay the inheritance tax to France. And because there's a tax treaty, that gets credited on the U.S. side. So you wouldn't pay that on the U.S. side, but you pay it on the French side. Fortunately, there's a tax treaty between the two countries. And it doesn't work 100% of the time. It's not a perfect situation, but it does normally eliminate paying taxes on the same money twice.
True.
Can I jump in with a question that occurred to me during the presentation, which is that you're talking about finding finance and mortgage brokers you work with. Do your clients typically find finance in France or from the US when purchasing a property in France? And I imagine that's a question.
You cannot get financing from the US to purchase a property in France. Okay. They cannot secure the property. You can, however, get a line of credit based on your U.S. holdings, which is going to be at a higher interest rate because the U.S. rates are higher. And a lot of our clients do that. Yeah. I do it myself even.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
It's not specifically mortgage attached to a property. Now, okay, in reverse, I was able years ago this is when lending wasn't quite so, tied up in knots as it is now. But I was able many years ago to take an equity release loans, like a line of credit here in France, based on my French properties, in order to purchase a property in the US, which I did when it was $1.50 to the euro. Now I'm talking about 2008, so it was a long time ago. But it was an intelligent transaction because of the rate of exchange. So I purchased a property in New York for my daughter using my French equity releases, French loans, to do that. I just recently sold it when the rate of exchange was closer to parity, so it turned out to be a good financial decision.
It's complicated, isn't it? You kind of need advice from a currency advisor, financial advisor, from you as a real estate advisor. You need to kind of bring it untaxed and bring them all together in a sense, ideally.
Yes, but that is what we do. That is how, we have a variety of resources. I'm basically a strategist. So when I talk to clients on a one-on-one basis, my goal is to take what they're thinking, which is usually through rosy-colored glasses and has, just kind of pie-in-the-sky ideas, and bring it down to reality and really give them direction and make it work in the best way possible. And that's basically what we do, in essence. And then the property is just part of that whole strategy.
Okay, we have another question, Adrian, regarding our fees. Do you want to address a little bit what our fees are to do a property search?
Well, I'm not going to openly discuss the fee amounts, but I will say that what we do is we take an advance fee that gets us out there searching for property, which is non-refundable. That gets us out there doing the work. And then there's a commission or a finder's fee that's paid after. And it is a percentage. When we have a commission share with the selling agency, we would then refund that back to the client. So rather than someone going off on their own and looking, going straight to the agencies, if they go direct to an agent, then there's no opportunity for that commission share. If they allow us to contact the agency, then there's an opportunity for the commission share, and it could end up our client paying very, very little to us, but having full advantage of the services. So it's really the smartest way to do it. I don't think that anyone out there who does not have experience in France doing this should do this on their own. Whether you're working with us or someone else, it is just too important. You can really waste an awful lot of time and money and anxiety by not having professional advice, honestly.
Great. We had a rental related question. Do we even want to touch on the subject of rentals?
Why not?
It's a little off topic, and the question is very specific, but we can talk a little bit more. But Allison wants to know, what is the best way about setting up a caution bancaire, and when in the process does that occur?
Okay, so what she's talking about, the caution bancaire, is basically a year's worth of rent in an escrow account that might be required by the landlord in order to secure the rent of the property, which happens all the time. But there's now another method, which is an insurance policy that's offered by a company called GarantMe, GarantMe.fr, that basically the tenant takes out an insurance policy that protects the landlord from the tenant not paying the rent, which seems rather crazy, but that's the way it works. And the landlords will want to see that kind of security or the caution bancaire. A caution bancaire does not need to be set up in advance. It's only if the landlord requires it, but you do have to have a bank account to do it. And then the money is held in the bank and it can't be touched and there's no interest on it. So it just sits there doing nothing for anybody. You cannot pay your rent out of it either. So it's really just a waste. I prefer the insurance policy as a solution myself.
Mm-hmm. It's been a real game changer for us in helping clients secure rental property.
Yes, that's right. And it's much easier. It's easier to put in place.
Yeah, much easier, much easier. Okay, we have another question from someone who says it's from an anonymous attendee. If we have found a property we are interested in, can you provide an appraisal-like service?
Yes, you can hire us to do an appraisal, which is a separate service. Or you can hire us for a purchase assistance service, which will give you an opinion on the property. However, you will have had to identify the property and made the offer on it, because you're really smarter just letting us do the search and finding you the best property. You know, what happens is, because there's this 4 to 6 month lag time that properties are not sold in that amount of time, the listings are left on for all those months. They don't take the listings down. So a good 3/4 of all the properties that you see online are not even available anymore. So people are they're having fun surfing. It's really great. But they could be wasting their time because the property could already be spoken for. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to find out. Also, we tend to find out that, you know, you can get sucked into the look of a property when it really doesn't meet your criteria. So after you've really determined what it is you're looking for, maybe that property you thought was just, you know, that you fell in love with doesn't really work for a variety of reasons. And there's a reality to it. And I see that all the time. I had clients very recently show me this gorgeous property in Provence that they had totally fallen in love with. And I basically took one look and said, this is gorgeous, but do you want to spend the rest of your retirement life, you know, working on this house, eating you out of house and home, and spending all your time thinking about that house? Because that's what they would be doing. It would not exactly be the kind of travel all over Europe retirement they had in mind. They'd be stuck there. So, you know, sometimes as I said, there's a reality, and unfortunately I burst a few bubbles every now and then, but it usually works out better in the end.
Like the bubbles are the people that want to buy a chateau.
Yeah, if there's anybody out there that is dreaming of a chateau, please put that dream on the shelf. Okay, because you have to have very deep pockets, very, very deep pockets, and be prepared to spend your life just dealing with that chateau every minute of every day. Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another question. It's about FATCA. And as you were saying, it's an issue that affects Americans living abroad around the world, potentially being limited from accessing banking and different services. Have you seen it affect the ability to get financing for buying a property? Or
every single day. It's the number one problem. Yes, that's why I brought it up.
Yes. So how do you get around that? Or just certain lenders are less averse, or do you pay higher rates? Or
we used to do business with just about every bank, and before FATCA, just about every bank out there was prepared to work with foreign buyers and particularly with American buyers. Now there are banks that will work with foreign buyers but not Americans because of FATCA specifically. So there's only a few banks willing to lend to Americans. And you know, what's really sad about all of this is that we, as Americans, we are represented, we can vote absentee. So we have a voice, but we don't have a voice as expatriates. There's no one that represents us as expatriates, with the exception of a handful of organizations like the ACA and AARO, that really, the ACA is American Citizens Abroad. There's a few organizations that represent our interests, but they're lobbyists. There's no vote. it's kind of a train wreck for us.
That's very interesting. We have a session tomorrow on that exact question. ACA are joining, and somebody from abroad, because it's a huge issue.
Well, they're battling, for example, okay, the U.S. is one of 2 countries in the entire world that has citizenship-based taxation. Okay, one of 2 in the whole world. And we in France, of course, have residency-based taxation. This means that you're owing to the U.S. for the rest of your life as an American, regardless of whether you live and work there. And there's a whole slew of accidental Americans who had no intention of ever living or working in the U.S., who have to turn in a U.S. tax return every single year as a result of it. And these organizations are battling that as well. I don't see that it's ever really going to change, though. But we're trying.
Okay, we have another FATCA-related question from Janice and Unziata. Do you recommend paying all cash to avoid mortgage/FATCA?
Well, I never recommend paying cash if you can get a mortgage, because you should always use OPM, other people's money, whenever you can, because if the interest rate on the mortgage is lower than the return you can get by investing that money in some other way, then it's not a smart financial move not to take a mortgage. Now, if you're sitting with cash and it's not earning anything anywhere, then it's probably better off in a real asset, in a property. But I can connect them with lots of advisors who will give you lots of ways to earn more than a 3% interest rate.
And Janice, who asked that question, said she would be subject to age discrimination, which sadly exists in France. Yeah,
right. Which might mean that she'd have to pay cash.
Yeah.
Although she can possibly get a line of credit on the U.S. side, or a loan with a private bank if she has enough means. If she has enough to buy a property, right? If she has $500,000 or €1 million to buy a property, then there are ways to reinvest that in a different way and get a line of credit against it. Okay.
Okay.
We've got 5 minutes, so that's a couple of questions.
Anybody else have questions? Because we've covered everything that's coming in. That's come in.
Great. You go if you got a question.
No, I think we've covered a lot, and it's been great. And I think between the presentation and the questions, it's been fantastic. I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions. People think of things afterwards as well. In which case, get in touch with Adrian via adrianleeds.com, and I'm sure she'll be happy to answer.
Of course she would. I would like to also encourage all of those who are thinking of moving to Europe and don't know where in Europe to consider France, okay, on that note, because France is, at least, it's complicated, it's bureaucratic, but it really offers everything. You're in the center of Europe, so you can travel all over easily. Excuse me for my phone ringing. But we have a very high cultural lifestyle. France really offers just about everything you could need or desire, and it's really risk-free. And that's because of the way France operates. So we think it's a great place to live. I've been here 28 years. I'm never going back. And I will say that, okay, on a final note, that if you ever do come to France for any period of time, you will not ever leave. It's just emotionally impossible, because you're never going to want to go back to that other lifestyle. The lifestyle in the United States, which is the experience I have as an American, is such that, if you're not in New York City, you're basically in your car. You're living in a bubble, and you don't have this communal living with other people in a public way. which is really fantastic. I mean, there's just nothing quite like cafe lifestyle. It's, the cafe life and enjoying being around and with other people. You've got a very high quality, standards on everything, whether it be food and wine, culture, all of those things. It just is endless, the amount of things there are to do and see in one small place. It's fantastic. Learning French is not easy, but it's a beautiful language and worth learning. And if you're in certain parts of France, you really don't need the language as much as you might think. It took me many years to learn French, and I still have nowhere close to mastered it, but at least I can get along. But I speak English almost 95% of the time anyway. And I don't know, Patty, what else can we say fantastic about France?
Good question. I mean, I'm on board with you that if you come, you'll never want to leave. I came for a year or two, 8 years ago. Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's a matter of finding the best spot for you. I am particularly thrilled with Nice. That is true. Nice definitely is nice. And Nice offers just, gorgeous scenery, the best weather in all of France, and an international airport and fantastic transportation. And so if what you want is something more relaxed, not quite as hectic a lifestyle as Paris, and a little less expensive, Nice is a really good choice. And not even the enclaves outside of Nice, Nice proper. Nice proper, where everything is happening. There's a really large American community there. It's very active. There are lots of things to do. And do not need a car. Living without a car is the best thing that ever happened to me. 28 years, no car. I can tell you it's amazing. It's healthier. I get more exercise. I'm outdoors more, and I don't have the hassle or the expense of a car, which is expensive.
Well, yeah. I think we're coming up to the hour. Thank you very, very much once again for the wonderful presentation.
Pleasure all mine, Hugo. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Hugo.
No, so thank you to everyone who's joined us today as well. If you have any follow-up questions, reach out to Adrian at adrianleeds.com.